The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the Grand Plaza Hotel, casting golden rectangles across the polished marble floor. Outside, the streets of Boston hummed with weekend traffic. But inside the hotel's largest ballroom, a different kind of excitement buzzed. Workers scurried about, arranging flowers on tables covered with crisp white linens, adjusting chair positions and setting up the small stage where the band would play later. In just 2 hours, this room would welcome guests celebrating the wedding of Beth and Tom. Among the early arrivals was Sister Agnes, an elderly nun who had traveled all the way from her convent in rural Vermont. At 83 years old, she moved slowly but with purpose, her wrinkled hands gripping a simple wooden cane. Despite her age, her eyes remained bright and alert, taking in the elegant surroundings with quiet appreciation. Her traditional black and white habit stood out starkly against the colorful decorations of the reception hall. "Auntie Agnes," called a voice, and Sister Agnes turned to see her niece Beth hurrying toward her, still in her bathrobe with her hair half done, having snuck down from the bridal suite. The young woman embraced her aunt carefully, mindful of her fragile frame. "I'm so glad you made it. I was worried the drive might be too much for you." "Nonsense, dear," Sister Agnes replied, her voice soft but clear. "I wouldn't miss your special day for anything in the world. Brother Paul was kind enough to drive me. He's parking the car now." She patted Beth's hand affectionately. "You should be getting ready." "Don't worry about me, I'll just sit quietly and watch all the preparations." Beth hesitated. "Are you sure? I could have someone show you to your room to rest before the reception." "I've been sitting in a car for 3 hours," Sister Agnes said with a gentle laugh. "I'd much rather stretch my legs and take in the sights. This is quite different from our little convent." After making sure her aunt was comfortable, Beth rushed back upstairs to continue getting ready. Sister Agnes found a plush chair near the edge of the dance floor and settled in, enjoying the comforting bustle of the workers as they transformed the space. The convent was peaceful, sometimes too peaceful, and there was something delightful about being in the midst of such joyful activity. As she watched, her attention was drawn to something across the room that made her heart skip a beat. A magnificent grand piano, its polished black surface gleaming under the chandeliers. It sat in the corner of the ballroom, lid raised, waiting silently for someone's touch. Sister Agnes felt a familiar longing stir within her. How long had it been since she'd played a piano of that quality? The convent had an old upright with yellowed keys and slightly uneven tuning that she still played for Sunday services. But it was nothing like this beautiful instrument before her. Almost without realizing it, she found herself standing, her cane tapping gently against the floor as she made her way slowly across the room. The workers, busy with their tasks, barely noticed the small black-clad figure moving through their midst. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a long moment, simply admiring it, the perfect curve of its side, the gleaming brass pedals, the pristine ivory and ebony keys. Gently, reverently, she reached out a gnarled finger and pressed a single key. The note rang out pure and true before fading into silence. Sister Agnes closed her eyes, savoring the sound. "Excuse me, ma'am, but the piano is not for guest use." Sister Agnes opened her eyes to find a young man in a crisp hotel uniform standing beside her. His name tag identified him as Ryan, and his expression, while polite, was firm. "I was just admiring it," she explained with a smile. "It's a beautiful instrument." "Yes, it is," Ryan agreed, his tone softening slightly at her gentle manner. "It's a Steinway Model D concert grand. The hotel brought it in specially for today's event." "A Steinway," Sister Agnes murmured, her eyes lighting up. "I played on a Steinway once many years ago in New York. The tone is unmistakable." Something in the way she spoke, with knowledge and reverence, made Ryan look at her more carefully. "Are you a pianist, sister?" She gave a small, humble shrug. "I was once. Now I just play for our small congregation at the convent." She didn't mention the arthritis that had stiffened her fingers over the years or the countless hours she had once spent practicing scales and arpeggios. "I'm afraid this piano is reserved exclusively for our professional musicians," Ryan explained. "The bride and groom have hired a jazz quartet for the reception, and the pianist is very particular about who touches the instrument before he performs." "Of course, I understand," Sister Agnes said, though disappointment flickered across her face. "Professional musicians can be quite protective of their instruments, especially ones as fine as this." Ryan seemed to hesitate, perhaps sensing her disappointment. The musicians won't arrive for another hour. Perhaps, Ryan, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. A woman in an expensive-looking suit approached, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. The florist needs your approval on the arrangement for the head table. Ryan straightened immediately. Yes, Miss Winters, I'll be right there. He turned back to Sister Agnes. I'm sorry, sister, but I need to attend to this. Please enjoy the reception, but I must ask you to leave the piano untouched. Sister Agnes nodded graciously. Thank you for your time, young man. As Ryan hurried away, Sister Agnes cast one last longing look at the piano before returning to her seat. She watched as more guests began to arrive, the room gradually filling with laughter and conversation. Many were dressed in the latest fashions, the women in elegant dresses, the men in sharp suits. Sister Agnes sat quietly in her corner, her simple habit a stark contrast to the finery around her. Brother Paul, a kindly man in his 60s who served as the convent's groundskeeper and driver, eventually found her. There you are, Sister Agnes. I was looking all over for you. Are you comfortable here? Can I get you anything? I'm quite all right, Brother Paul, just enjoying the atmosphere. She nodded toward the piano. They have a Steinway. Brother Paul followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. Few at the convent knew of Sister Agnes's musical past, but Brother Paul was one of them. Perhaps you'll get a chance to play it later. She shook her head. It's reserved for the professionals. As it should be. Brother Paul frowned slightly. That's a shame. It's been years since I've heard you play anything besides our old upright. God gives us different seasons in life. Sister Agnes replied philosophically. My season of performances ended long ago. As the reception officially began and the newly married couple made their entrance to enthusiastic applause, Sister Agnes watched with a heart full of joy for her niece. Beth looked radiant in her wedding gown, her face glowing with happiness as she and Tom moved through the crowd, greeting their guests. When they reached Sister Agnes, Beth knelt down to embrace her aunt properly. Auntie, I'm so happy you're here. You look beautiful, my dear, Sister Agnes said, her eyes misty with emotion. Your mother would have been so proud. Beth's mother, Sister Agnes's younger sister, had passed away 5 years earlier. I know, Beth whispered, squeezing her aunt's hands. That's why having you here means everything. As the evening progressed, Sister Agnes observed the celebration with quiet contentment. The food was served, speeches were given, and eventually the music began. The jazz quartet took their places on the small stage, the pianist settling at the magnificent Steinway. His fingers flew over the keys with practiced ease, filling the room with lively music that soon had many guests on the dance floor. Sister Agnes found herself tapping her foot in time with the rhythm, her trained ear appreciating the musician's skill. Yet as she watched, she couldn't help but remember the way her own hands had once moved across piano keys, before age and arthritis had taken their toll, when music had been at the center of her life. A young waiter paused by her table offering champagne. Sister Agnes declined with a smile, requesting water instead. The young man returned promptly with her drink and hesitated before asking, Are you enjoying the music, sister? Very much, she replied. He's quite talented. Do you play an instrument yourself? The waiter asked conversationally. Before Sister Agnes could answer, Beth's new husband, Tom, appeared, slightly flushed from dancing. Sister Agnes, I hope you're enjoying yourself. He turned to the waiter. You're speaking to a musical legend, young man. My wife tells me her aunt was quite the pianist in her day. The waiter looked surprised, glancing between Tom and the elderly nun. Really? Sister Agnes waved a dismissive hand. That was a very long time ago. Beth says you studied at some famous music school in New York, Tom persisted. Juilliard, Sister Agnes admitted softly. But that was another life, before I found my true calling with the church. The waiter's eyes widened, clearly impressed. Juilliard? Wow. As the conversation continued, Sister Agnes couldn't help glancing once more at the grand piano across the room. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to sit at that bench again, to place her fingers on those keys, to create music on an instrument worthy of the greatest concert halls. But then she smiled to herself and turned her attention back to Tom and the curious waiter. Some dreams belonged to the past, and she had made her peace with that long ago. Tonight was about celebrating new beginnings, her beloved niece's marriage, not dwelling on what used to be. Still, as the evening wore on, Sister Agnes couldn't quite silence the melody that played in her heart, a tune that had been waiting patiently for years to find its voice once more. As the wedding reception continued around her, Sister Agnes found herself lost in memories. The elegant hotel ballroom faded away, replaced by images from her past, a past that few people at the reception could have imagined. The jazz quartet took a short break, and in the momentary lull her mind wandered back through the decades. She had been born Rose Sullivan, the oldest daughter of Irish immigrants who had settled in Boston. Her father worked on the docks, her mother took in laundry, and somehow they managed to keep food on the table for their 5 children. Life wasn't easy, but there was always music in their small apartment. Her father played the fiddle, her mother sang old country songs, and the children would join in with whatever makeshift instruments they could find. Rose's talent was discovered one Sunday after Mass when she was 8 years old. The church organist had left the keyboard unlocked, and while her parents chatted with neighbors, little Rose slipped away. Drawn to the instrument like a moth to flame, she climbed onto the bench and began picking out the hymn they had sung that morning, working by ear until she got it right. Father O'Malley found her there, her small fingers dancing across the keys with natural grace. Instead of scolding her, he spoke with her parents. By the end of the month, Rose was taking lessons from Mrs. Chen, a piano teacher who, recognizing extraordinary talent, agreed to teach her for whatever the family could afford. Often, just a loaf of her mother's bread, or a few freshly caught fish from her father. Sister Agnes smiled to herself as she recalled Mrs. Chen's tiny apartment, dominated by an upright piano that had seen better days. The elderly woman had been strict but kind, pushing Rose to practice scales until her fingers ached, teaching her to read music as easily as words. "Music is a language," Mrs. Chen would say, tapping Rose's hands with a wooden ruler when they faltered. And like any language, it must be practiced every day. By 16, Rose had outgrown what Mrs. Chen could teach her. The elderly piano teacher made it her mission to find her gifted student a path forward. She arranged for Rose to play for the music director at Boston University, who was so impressed that he connected her with a scholarship opportunity at Juilliard. The day Rose received the acceptance letter was one of the happiest and most terrifying of her life. No one in her family had ever gone to college, let alone to the most prestigious music school in the country. New York City might as well have been another planet. Her journey to Juilliard took her far from her family's working-class neighborhood. In those days, a young woman traveling alone to New York City raised eyebrows, but Rose's parents, despite their fears, refused to stand in the way of their daughter's gift. Her father worked double shifts for months to buy her a proper suitcase and a new dress. Her mother sewed name tags into every item of clothing. The entire family saw her off at the train station, her younger siblings wide-eyed with awe at their big sister's adventure. The first year at Juilliard had been the hardest. Among the children of wealth and privilege, Rose's second-hand clothes and thick Boston accent made her an outsider. But at the piano, all differences vanished. Music was the great equalizer, and Rose's talent spoke for itself. She practiced longer and harder than anyone, often staying in the practice rooms until security asked her to leave at night. By her second year, she had earned the respect of both fellow students and teachers. By her third, she was being invited to perform at smaller venues around the city, and by graduation she had made her debut at Carnegie Hall as part of a showcase of rising stars. What followed were 10 glorious years of concerts across America and Europe. Rose Sullivan became known for her passionate interpretations of romantic composers, Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. Critics praised her remarkable emotional depth and technical brilliance. She recorded 2 albums, lived out of suitcases, and for a while, it seemed the trajectory of her life was set. Then came the summer of 1963, when she accepted an invitation to play at a charity concert in a small town in Vermont. The concert was to benefit a local convent school that needed money for building repairs. Rose agreed without much thought. It was a good cause, and she had a few weeks free between larger engagements. The Sisters of Mercy ran a school for girls, many of them orphans or from troubled homes. Rose stayed at the convent for a week, preparing for the concert and, at the Mother Superior's request, giving impromptu lessons to some of the students. Something about the peaceful rhythm of the days, the simple meal shared in companionable silence, the sense of purpose that infused every task. It awakened something in her that had been dormant. One evening, unable to sleep, Rose wandered into the convent's small chapel. In the dim light, she sat at the ancient pump organ and began to play softly, not her usual concert pieces, but the hymns of her childhood. She didn't notice Mother Superior enter until the older woman was sitting beside her. "You play as if you're talking to God," the nun said simply. Rose's fingers stilled on the keys. "Sometimes when I play, I feel connected to something larger than myself. It's hard to explain." "You don't need to explain it to me," Mother Superior replied with a gentle smile. "Music has always been a form of prayer." They talked until dawn. About music, about faith, about the hunger for meaning that success and applause had never quite satisfied. When Rose left the convent a few days later, something had shifted inside her. The concert tour continued, but she found herself increasingly distracted, her mind returning to that conversation in the quiet chapel. 6 months later, to the shock of the music world, Rose Sullivan canceled her remaining engagements and returned to Vermont. At 32, she entered the convent as a postulant. The newspapers had a field day. Concert pianist trades Carnegie Hall for convent. But Rose, soon to become Sister Agnes, found a piece that had eluded her on stage. That didn't mean she abandoned music. Rather, she found a new purpose for her gift. She taught piano to generations of girls at the convent school, many of whom had never been exposed to classical music before. She played for services, for community events, for the simple joy of making music without the pressure of perfection. Over the decades, she watched her former colleagues continue their careers, some rising to international fame. Occasionally, she received letters from them, or from former students who had gone on to their own musical pursuits. She never regretted her choice, though sometimes, when her fingers moved over the convent's humble, upright piano, she would remember the feel of a concert grand beneath her hands. Responsive as a living thing, the years passed. The convent school grew, then shrank as times changed. Sister Agnes's hair turned from black to gray to white. Her fingers, once so nimble, began to stiffen with arthritis. She adapted her playing, finding ways to work around the pain. On her worst days, she would soak her hands in warm water before touching the keys. By her 70s, she was playing mostly simple accompaniments for the choir, leaving the more complex pieces to younger nuns or students. But she never stopped teaching, never stopped sharing her love of music. "Even if your fingers can no longer play what your heart hears," she would tell her elderly students, "the music is still in you." Now, at 83, she could still play, though not with the technical prowess of her youth. On good days, when the weather was warm and her joints cooperated, she could still coax beauty from the old upright at the convent. On bad days, she would simply listen to recordings, her gnarled fingers moving silently in her lap, playing along from memory. A burst of laughter from a nearby table jolted Sister Agnes back to the present. The ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel reappeared around her, glittering with lights and alive with the sounds of celebration. The jazz quartet had returned from their break and were setting up for another set. The pianist, a young man with fashionably tousled hair, adjusted the bench in front of the magnificent Steinway. Sister Agnes watched his hands as they stretched and flexed, preparing for the next piece. Young hands, strong and supple, untroubled by the stiffness that now plagued her own. She glanced down at her hands, resting on the table before her. The skin was thin, marked with age spots, the veins prominent, the knuckles swollen. Yet these hands had once drawn tears from audiences, had shaped the musical education of hundreds of students, had brought comfort through melody to the sick and dying. These hands had a lifetime of music in them. Across the room, her niece Beth was dancing with her new husband, her face alight with joy. Sister Agnes smiled at the sight. Life moved in cycles, beginnings and endings, crescendos and diminuendos. Her time in the spotlight had long since passed, but she had found different kinds of music to make, different forms of harmony to create in the world. Still, as the pianist began to play again, his fingers flying over the keys of that beautiful Steinway, Sister Agnes couldn't help but wonder, after all these years, after all the changes in her life and in her body, what would it feel like to sit at a piano like that once more? To play, not for critics or audiences, but simply for the joy of making music on an instrument worthy of the sound. She pushed the thought away. It was a silly fancy, an old woman's daydream. She was here to celebrate her niece's marriage, not to dwell on might-have-beens. Yet as the evening continued and she listened to the quartet play, a small spark of longing remained, glowing quietly in her heart like an ember that refused to die. The wedding reception was in full swing. Couples twirled on the dance floor, the jazz quartet played a lively tune, and waiters moved smoothly between tables with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Sister Agnes sat contentedly at her table, tapping her foot lightly to the music. Brother Paul had gone to get them both some water, and she was enjoying a moment of solitude amid the celebration. A young couple stopped by her table, slightly out of breath from dancing. The woman, one of Beth's college friends, smiled warmly at Sister Agnes. "You must be Beth's aunt. She's told us so much about you." Sister Agnes returned the smile. "All good things, I hope." "Oh, absolutely," the woman assured her. "Beth says you're the reason she loves music so much. She told us you taught her to play piano when she was little." "I did." Sister Agnes nodded, remembering those summer visits when Beth would come to stay at the convent for a few weeks. She was a quick learner, though she preferred pop songs to the classical pieces I tried to teach her. The man laughed. "That sounds like Beth. She made us all listen to boy bands in college." They chatted for a few more minutes before returning to the dance floor. Sister Agnes watched them go, pleased by their friendliness. She had worried a bit about coming to this wedding. Would she, an elderly nun, feel out of place among all these young people in their fine clothes? But everyone had been kind, treating her with respect but not the awkward deference that sometimes made social situations uncomfortable. Across the room, she saw Beth in animated conversation with the hotel manager, the same Ryan who had stopped her from playing the piano earlier. Beth was gesturing emphatically, and though Sister Agnes couldn't hear what was being said, her niece's body language suggested she was trying to convince him of something. Ryan kept shaking his head, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Before Sister Agnes could wonder what they might be discussing, Brother Paul returned with their drinks. "The bar is quite crowded," he said, setting down 2 glasses of water. "Everyone seems to be having a wonderful time." "Yes, it's a lovely celebration," Sister Agnes agreed, taking a sip of her water. "Beth looks so happy." "She does. And she's done well for herself marrying a doctor." "Tom seems like a good man," Sister Agnes said. "That matters more than his profession." Brother Paul smiled. "Always the wise one, aren't you, sister?" Their conversation was interrupted when Beth's husband Tom appeared at their table, looking slightly flushed. "Sister Agnes," he said with a warm smile, "I wonder if I might borrow you for a moment." Sister Agnes looked up, surprised. "Of course, Tom, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her, offering his arm to help her up. "There's just something Beth and I want to discuss with you." Curious, Sister Agnes rose from her chair, leaning on her cane with one hand and taking Tom's arm with the other. Brother Paul watched them go with a puzzled expression. Tom led her through the crowd toward a quiet corner where Beth was waiting, still engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion with Ryan, the hotel manager. When they approached, Beth looked up and her face brightened. "Auntie, there you are." She took her aunt's hand, squeezing them gently. "I've been having the most interesting conversation about you." Sister Agnes raised an eyebrow. "About me? Goodness, what could be so interesting about an old nun?" Beth exchanged glances with Tom, who gave a small nod of encouragement. "Auntie, why didn't you tell us you wanted to play the piano tonight?" Sister Agnes felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Oh dear, did someone mention that?" "It was just a passing fancy. The Steinway is so beautiful and I haven't played an instrument of that quality in years, but I completely understand it's reserved for the professionals." "That's the thing," Beth said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We just found out from Mrs. Chen's grandson. You remember Mrs. Chen, your old piano teacher? Her grandson, David, is friends with my college roommate, and he's here tonight. When I introduced myself as your niece, he couldn't believe it. He said his grandmother kept newspaper clippings about your concerts for years." Sister Agnes felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "Mrs. Chen saved articles about me? I had no idea. She passed away while I was in Europe. I never got to thank her properly for all she did for me." "David says his grandmother always called you her greatest student," Beth continued. He recognized your name immediately when the priest mentioned you during the ceremony. Tom stepped in. Sister Agnes, we had no idea about your history as a concert pianist. Beth knew you played and taught music, of course, but not that you performed at Carnegie Hall. That was a very long time ago, Sister Agnes said softly. Another lifetime, but don't you see? Beth pressed. This is why it's so unfair that they won't let you play the piano. You're probably more qualified than the pianist they hired. Sister Agnes shook her head firmly. Now, Beth, that's not true. That young man is very talented and he was hired to do a job. It would be inappropriate for me to interfere. Ryan, who had been listening to this exchange with increasing interest, cleared his throat. Sister, if I had known about your background, I might have. That is, the hotel policy is in place to protect our equipment, but exceptions can sometimes be made. Beth turned to him triumphantly. See? Even Ryan agrees. I didn't exactly say, Ryan began, but Tom cut him off. What my wife is trying to say, he explained, giving Ryan an apologetic smile, is that we'd love for her aunt to have a chance to play. It would mean a lot to us, especially since many of our guests don't know about her remarkable past. Ryan looked torn. The quartet is booked for the entire evening, and the pianist is quite particular about others using the Steinway. He specifically requested in his contract that no one else touch it. What if she played during their break? Tom suggested. They take a 20-minute break every hour, right? Maybe Sister Agnes could play for just 5 minutes during one of those breaks. Ryan hesitated, clearly weighing the request against hotel policy and the musician's preferences. I'll need to speak with the band leader, he said finally. I can't promise anything. That's all we ask, Beth said, giving him her most winning smile. As Ryan walked away to find the band leader, Sister Agnes turned to her niece with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. Beth, dear, this really isn't necessary. I'm perfectly content just listening to the music. Beth looked at her aunt, her expression softening. Auntie Agnes, I've watched you all evening. Every time you look at that piano, there's such longing in your eyes. Music was such an important part of your life. Don't you miss it? I still play at the convent, Sister Agnes protested weakly. On that old upright with the sticky keys? It's not the same, and you know it. Beth took her aunt's weathered hands in her own. Just once, I'd like to hear you play on an instrument worthy of your talent. Is that so wrong? Sister Agnes felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. My dear, I appreciate what you're trying to do, truly. But I'm not the pianist I once was. My hands... She looked down at her fingers, the knuckles swollen with arthritis. They don't work like they used to. I'd hate to disappoint you. You could never disappoint me, Beth said firmly. Ever. Tom, who had been keeping an eye on Ryan's progress across the room, touched his wife's shoulder. He's talking to the band leader now. The three of them watched as Ryan engaged in conversation with an older man wearing a dark suit and bow tie. The band leader looked over at their group, his expression unreadable. After what seemed like an eternity, he gave a small nod and Ryan headed back in their direction. The band leader has agreed, Ryan announced when he returned. During their next break, Sister Agnes can play for 5 minutes, no longer. They're due to start another set in 40 minutes, so the break will begin in about 20 minutes from now. Beth clapped her hands together in delight. That's wonderful! Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you, Sister Agnes echoed. Still not entirely sure this was a good idea, but touched by her niece's enthusiasm. I should warn you, Ryan added, lowering his voice. The pianist wasn't thrilled. He agreed only because it's the bride and groom's request, but he made it very clear that he expects his instrument to be treated with the utmost care. Of course. Sister Agnes nodded. I understand completely. As Ryan excused himself to attend to other duties, Beth turned to her aunt with shining eyes. Now what will you play? Something short but impressive. Sister Agnes thought for a moment. Perhaps Chopin. His nocturne in E-flat major isn't too demanding on my hands, and it's just about the right length. Perfect, Beth declared. Should we tell everyone or just let it be a surprise? A surprise, I think, Sister Agnes said, suddenly feeling nervous. No need to make a big announcement. Those who are interested will listen. Those who aren't can continue their conversations. Auntie, once you start playing, I guarantee everyone will listen, Beth said with confidence. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Sister Agnes returned to her table, where Brother Paul was curious about her mysterious meeting with the bride and groom. When she explained what was about to happen, his face lit up. I knew they wouldn't be able to keep you away from that piano for long, he said with a chuckle.
What will you play?
Chopin, she replied. If my hands cooperate. Sister Agnes sipped her water, trying to calm her nerves. It had been years, decades really, since she had played for an audience larger than the small congregation at the convent. What if she couldn't remember the piece? What if her fingers fumbled on the keys? What if— Stop that, Brother Paul said gently, interrupting her thoughts. I know that look. You're worrying needlessly. You'll be magnificent, as always. Before she could respond, the band finished their current song, and the band leader stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taking a short break. Please continue to enjoy your evening, and we'll be back in 20 minutes. As the musicians left the small stage, Beth appeared at her aunt's side. It's time, she said, offering her arm for support. Sister Agnes took a deep breath, rose from her chair, and leaning on her cane, allowed her niece to lead her toward the grand piano that awaited her in the corner of the ballroom. The grand piano waited in the corner of the ballroom, its polished black surface gleaming under the soft lights. As Beth led her aunt toward it, a few guests noticed and nudged their companions. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The elderly nun was going to play? This was unexpected. Sister Agnes felt every eye in the room on her as she made her slow way across the floor. She gripped her cane tightly, suddenly aware of how small and frail she must appear to these people. In her black habit, with her white hair and wrinkled face, she looked exactly like what she was, an old woman long past her prime. These wedding guests didn't see Rose Sullivan, the concert pianist who had once commanded stages across 2 continents. They saw only Sister Agnes, an elderly nun who was perhaps a curiosity at this elegant celebration. Are you nervous? Beth whispered as they approached the piano. A little, Sister Agnes admitted. It's been a very long time since I played for an audience like this. You'll be wonderful, Beth assured her, squeezing her arm gently. Just pretend you're playing for me like when I was little. They reached the piano and Sister Agnes paused, taking a moment to admire the instrument up close. The Steinway Model D was the pinnacle of piano craftsmanship, nearly 9 feet long, with a rich, resonant sound that could fill concert halls without amplification. She had played on such instruments in her youth, but it had been many decades since she had the opportunity. Beth helped her aunt settle onto the bench, adjusting it so she could reach the pedals comfortably. Sister Agnes placed her cane carefully beside the bench, then flexed her fingers, wincing slightly at the familiar ache in her joints. Take your time, Beth murmured, still standing beside her. There's no rush. Sister Agnes nodded, then looked up at her niece with sudden concern. Perhaps I should play something simpler. The Chopin might be too ambitious. Play whatever feels right, Beth said. No one here is judging you. With one final reassuring smile, Beth stepped away, leaving her aunt alone at the piano. Sister Agnes took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She was being silly, she told herself. This wasn't Carnegie Hall. This was just a wedding reception, and she was just an old woman indulging in a moment of nostalgia. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. Just to familiarize herself with the action of this particular instrument, she played a simple scale, quietly, almost tentatively. The keys responded beautifully, with just the right amount of resistance. The sound was pure and true. Sister Agnes closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. Then she began to play. She had intended to start with the Chopin Nocturne, a piece gentle enough to serve as background music if the guests chose to continue their conversations. But as her fingers touched the keys with more confidence, a different piece came to them, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece far more demanding, more passionate, more revealing of the pianist's soul. It was a piece she had played hundreds of times in her performing days, a piece that lived in her muscle memory despite the years and the arthritis. The opening notes were quiet, almost hesitant, like a storyteller clearing their throat before beginning a tale. Then the melody emerged, simple at first, growing in complexity as it unfolded. For the first few measures, Sister Agnes was acutely aware of her surroundings, the murmur of conversations that hadn't quite died down, the clink of glasses, the rustle of fancy clothes as people shifted in their seats, but as the music flowed from her fingers, everything else began to fade away. There was only the piano, only the music, only this moment suspended in time. Her fingers, which had felt so stiff and unresponsive earlier, now seemed to remember their old skill. They moved across the keys with growing confidence, finding the notes without hesitation. The pain in her joints was still there, but it seemed distant, unimportant compared to the joy of making music on this magnificent instrument. The ballade built in intensity, the simple melody giving way to intricate runs and arpeggios, dramatic chords and delicate trills. It was a piece that told a story of longing and passion, of memory and loss, of the bittersweet beauty of life itself. As Sister Agnes played, she poured her own story into the music, her years of dedication, her choice to leave the concert stage for a life of faith, the joy she had found in teaching others, and yes, the occasional moments of wondering what might have been. She was dimly aware that the room had fallen completely silent. The conversations had stopped. Even the waiters had paused in their duties. But she didn't look up. Her focus was entirely on the music, on coaxing the best possible sound from this wonderful piano, on doing justice to Chopin's masterpiece. The piece grew more challenging as it progressed, with rapid passages that had once been easy, but now required all her concentration. Her fingers protested, the familiar pain sharpening, but she pushed through it. This might be her last chance to play on such an instrument, and she was determined to make the most of it. As the ballade approached its dramatic conclusion, Sister Agnes felt something she hadn't experienced in years, that sense of connection with something larger than herself, that feeling that she was merely a channel for the music rather than its creator. It was what had drawn her to the piano as a child, what had sustained her through years of practice and performance, what she had tried to explain to her students at the convent. In this moment, despite her age and her physical limitations, she was not just playing the piano, she was making music in its truest sense. The final section of the ballade was a test for any pianist, rapid scales building to thunderous chords, a crescendo of emotion and technical challenge. Sister Agnes's hands moved with a speed that belied her years, finding the notes by instinct rather than sight or conscious thought. The magnificent Steinway responded to her touch, filling the ballroom with sound that seemed too big, too powerful to come from the small elderly woman on the bench. And then, as suddenly as a summer storm passes, the piece ended with a series of resolute chords. The final notes hung in the air for a moment, then faded into silence. Complete silence. Sister Agnes remained motionless for a moment, her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes closed. She was aware of a fine tremor in her fingers, partly from exertion, partly from emotion. She had done it. After all these years she had played, really played, again. Slowly she opened her eyes and looked up. What she saw took her breath away. The entire wedding reception, every guest, every waiter, the hotel manager, the band members who had returned from their break early, all were standing completely still, looking at her with expressions that ranged from shock to wonder to frank amazement. Beth stood near the front, tears streaming down her face. Tom beside her, his arm around his wife's shoulders, looked equally moved. In the heavy silence, Sister Agnes felt suddenly self-conscious. Had she played poorly? Had she made a spectacle of herself? She should say something. Apologize perhaps for interrupting the festivities with such a serious piece of music. Before she could speak, the silence was broken by a sound. A single person began to clap slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. Others joined in, and within seconds the entire ballroom erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause, the kind offered to an elderly amateur who had done her best. It was real applause, the kind that acknowledged genuine artistry, the kind she had once received in concert halls. The band leader, who had been watching from the edge of the stage, came forward, his face alight with professional appreciation. "Sister," he said when he could make himself heard over the continuing applause. "That was, I have no words, extraordinary." The jazz pianist, who had been so protective of his instrument, stood nearby. His earlier reluctance had been replaced by a look of pure respect. He stepped forward and gave her a small bow. "I've been playing that piece for years," he said, "and I've never heard it performed with such humanity. Would you play something else for us?" Sister Agnes looked at him in surprise, then at the still applauding crowd. Beth was nodding enthusiastically, and Tom was giving her a thumbs up. Brother Paul, from his seat across the room, was beaming with pride. "I wouldn't want to impose," Sister Agnes began. But the pianist shook his head. "Please," he said, "it would be an honor to hear you play on my instrument." Sister Agnes felt a warm glow spread through her chest. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had just remembered how to create beauty despite age and pain. Then she looked back up at the expectant faces surrounding her. "Perhaps one more piece," she said with a small smile. "Something a little lighter this time, I think." As the applause finally died down, Sister Agnes turned back to the keyboard. The magnificent Steinway waited patiently for her touch, ready to sing again under her experienced hands. In this moment, she wasn't an elderly nun far from home, wasn't a curiosity at a fancy wedding reception. She was simply a musician, reunited with her art, ready to share the gift of music with those willing to listen. And as her fingers found the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune, Sister Agnes knew with absolute certainty that some gifts never fade. Even when they lie dormant for many years, some flames continue to burn no matter how softly, waiting only for a breath of opportunity to flare into brilliance once more. The final notes of Clair de Lune floated through the ballroom like a gentle mist, delicate and dreamlike. Sister Agnes lifted her hands from the keys, the piece complete. For a moment no one moved or spoke. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, reluctant to break the spell her music had cast. Then once again, applause erupted, even more enthusiastic than before. People rose to their feet, some wiping tears from their eyes. The hotel staff, who normally maintained professional detachment during events, were clapping along with the guests. Even Ryan, the manager who had initially blocked her from playing, was applauding with genuine appreciation. Beth rushed forward to embrace her aunt. "That was beautiful," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew you were good, but I never imagined. Why didn't you ever tell me how talented you really are?" Sister Agnes patted her niece's hand, touched by her reaction but slightly embarrassed by all the attention. "It wasn't important, dear. That part of my life was over long ago." "Well, it doesn't look over to me," Beth said, gesturing at the crowd still on their feet. The professional jazz pianist approached, waiting politely for Beth to step aside. "Sister Agnes," he said, extending his hand, "my name is Anthony. I studied at Juilliard too, though many years after you, obviously. What you just played?" He shook his head, seemingly at a loss for words. "That was masterful. Would you consider playing one more piece with our quartet? We know a few classical crossover arrangements that might work." Sister Agnes looked surprised. "Oh, I couldn't possibly. This is your engagement, and I've already taken up too much of your break time." Anthony smiled. "Trust me, no one minds, and it would be an honor to play with someone of your caliber." Before Sister Agnes could respond, the band leader joined them. "We'd really love it if you'd join us for one number," he said. The crowd would eat it up, and frankly, so would we. It's not every day we get to jam with a classical virtuoso. Sister Agnes hesitated. It had been so long since she had played with other musicians and never with a jazz ensemble. "I'm not familiar with jazz arrangements," she admitted. "Do you know Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue?" the band leader asked. Sister Agnes's eyes lit up. "I do, yes. It was part of my repertoire once upon a time." "Perfect. We have a simplified arrangement that keeps the main themes. You take the piano part, we'll fill in around you. No rehearsal needed, just follow your instincts." Looking at their eager faces, Sister Agnes found she couldn't refuse. "Very well," she said with a small smile. "But just one piece." Word spread quickly through the reception that the elderly nun was going to perform with the band. Guests who had stepped out returned hurriedly. Those at the bar quickly got their drinks and found places to stand. There was a palpable buzz of anticipation in the air. The band members took their positions: saxophone, bass, drums, and Anthony on a smaller keyboard set up to complement the grand piano, where Sister Agnes remained seated. The band leader counted them in and they began to play. The familiar opening clarinet glissando of Rhapsody in Blue soared through the room, followed by Sister Agnes's entrance on the piano. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sister Agnes herself. Instead of sticking to the written music, she found herself improvising, adding flourishes and embellishments that complemented but transformed the familiar piece. The jazz musicians responded in kind, picking up on her innovations and building on them. It was musical conversation at its finest. Sister Agnes would play a phrase. The saxophone would answer. The bass would comment. The drums would punctuate. Anthony on the second keyboard filled in harmonies that supported her playing without overshadowing it. There was joy in this musical dialogue, a playfulness that had the wedding guests swaying and smiling. Sister Agnes felt decades younger. The pain in her hands receded as she lost herself in the back and forth with these skilled musicians. They were speaking a language together, one that transcended age, background, and even musical training. She found herself laughing out loud at one point when the saxophonist played a particularly clever response to her piano run. When they finished, the applause was thunderous. The band members were grinning at her with undisguised admiration. Anthony shook his head in wonder. "Sister, you've been holding out on us. You can improvise like a jazz pianist." "I never have before," she confessed, slightly breathless from the exhilaration of the performance. "It just happened. That's what real music is all about," the bandleader said, letting it happen. As Sister Agnes prepared to return to her table, she found herself surrounded by wedding guests eager to speak with her. A distinguished-looking older gentleman approached, introducing himself as the Dean of Music at Boston University. "Sister Agnes, that was remarkable," he said. "We host a series of special concerts each year at the university. Would you consider being a guest performer at our spring recital? We would be honored to have you." Before she could respond, a woman in a stylish suit pressed a business card into her hand. "I'm with the Boston Symphony's Community Outreach Program," she explained. "We're always looking for ways to bring music to people who might not otherwise experience it. Schools in underserved neighborhoods, retirement homes, community centers. Someone with your talent and teaching background would be perfect for our program." More people gathered around asking questions, offering opportunities, expressing their admiration. It was overwhelming. Sister Agnes had never sought acclaim. Even in her performing days, she had been more interested in the music itself than in the recognition it brought her. Beth and Tom appeared at her side, sensing her growing fatigue. "I think my aunt needs to rest now," Beth said firmly but kindly to the crowd. "It's been an exciting evening for all of us." With gentle persistence, they helped Sister Agnes make her way back to her table, where Brother Paul waited with a glass of water and a concerned expression. "You've outdone yourself," he said as she sank gratefully into her chair. "How are your hands feeling?" Sister Agnes flexed her fingers, wincing slightly. "They'll be rather painful tomorrow, I expect. But it was worth it." "You certainly made an impression," Brother Paul said, nodding toward several people still watching her from a respectful distance. "I wouldn't be surprised if the convent starts getting donations after this." His words proved prophetic when Ryan, the hotel manager, approached their table a few minutes later. "Sister Agnes," he said with a warmth that contrasted sharply with his earlier professional coolness. "On behalf of the Grand Plaza Hotel, I want to apologize for initially preventing you from playing. Had I known of your extraordinary talent, I would never have hesitated." "There's no need for apologies," Sister Agnes assured him. "You were simply doing your job. Nevertheless, we'd like to make amends. The hotel would like to offer a donation to your convent school's music program. I understand from Beth that funding has been somewhat limited in recent years." Sister Agnes's eyes widened. "That's very generous, but please," Ryan said. "It would be our honor. Music education is so important, and after hearing you play, well, we want to help ensure that other talented young people have the opportunity to develop their gifts." After Ryan left, promising to be in touch about the details of the donation, 3 more wedding guests approached with similar offers. One was a music teacher at a private school who wanted to organize a joint concert with Sister Agnes's students. Another was a retired businessman who offered to fund the restoration of the convent's old upright piano. The third was a young mother who asked if Sister Agnes would consider taking on her daughter as a student, even if it meant driving 2 hours to the convent for lessons. "It seems you've started quite a chain reaction," Brother Paul observed as the evening began to wind down. "Mother Superior won't know what hit her when we get back with all these offers." Sister Agnes smiled tiredly. "God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? I came here simply to celebrate Beth's wedding and somehow ended up with potential funding for our music program." The reception was drawing to a close. Many guests had already left, and the hotel staff were discreetly beginning to clear tables. Beth and Tom came to say their goodbyes before leaving for their honeymoon. "Auntie, you made our wedding unforgettable," Beth said, embracing her aunt carefully. "Everyone is talking about your playing." "You stole the show." "Oh dear, that wasn't my intention," Sister Agnes said, genuinely distressed at the thought of overshadowing her niece's big day. Beth laughed. I'm joking. I couldn't be happier. Our wedding will be remembered forever as the one where the surprise star pianist was my aunt, the nun. How cool is that? What will you do about all those offers? Tom asked. The Boston Symphony, the university concert? Sister Agnes sighed. I don't know. At my age, making new commitments seems ambitious. Just think about it, Beth urged. You have so much to share, so much to give. Today proved that. After the newlyweds left, Brother Paul helped Sister Agnes to her feet. Ready to head back to the hotel? We have a long drive home tomorrow. Sister Agnes nodded but paused, looking back at the grand piano one last time. Anthony and his fellow musicians were packing up their instruments. Anthony caught her eye and gave her a respectful nod, which she returned with a small smile. As they made their way slowly through the now quiet ballroom, Sister Agnes reflected on the evening's unexpected turn of events. She had come to the wedding as an elderly relative, the kind often overlooked at such gatherings. She would leave as a musician rediscovered, her gift acknowledged and celebrated once more. But more important than the recognition, more precious than the applause, was the simple joy of making music again on a magnificent instrument, the feeling of being fully alive in the moment, of connecting with others through the universal language of melody and harmony. Penny, for your thoughts? Brother Paul asked as they waited for the elevator. Sister Agnes smiled. I was just thinking about what Beth said earlier, about appearances not telling the full story of a person's gifts and experiences. A wise observation. Brother Paul agreed. Yes, Sister Agnes said softly. We all have hidden depths, don't we? Things the world doesn't see at first glance. Sometimes we ourselves forget what lies beneath the surface until something or someone reminds us. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As they stepped inside, Sister Agnes felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. Her hands ached, but her heart was full. Tomorrow they would return to the quiet rhythms of convent life, but she would carry this evening with her. The music, the connections, the reminder that some gifts, once given, can never truly be lost. They simply wait, patient and enduring, for the right moment to be shared once more.